Before the flood, before the waters covered the earth, there was another age, an age nearly erased from memory, hidden in fragments of ancient scripture, preserved in texts many were afraid to read. They speak of a time when the boundary between heaven and earth was broken, when beings not meant to walk among men descended. From their union with humanity, something unnatural was born. They were called the Nephilim, giants in strength, terrible in presence, and for a time they ruled the earth. The ancient texts do not describe them as symbols. They do not present them as metaphor. They speak of them as something real, something that once walked upon the earth. In the days before the flood, when humanity was still young and the world was raw and unshaped, the sons of heaven descended. They crossed a boundary that had divided the seen from the unseen. They stepped from the realm above into the dust of the earth. They saw the daughters of men, and they chose. From that union something unnatural was born, not fully of heaven, not fully of earth. The Nephilim, giants in stature, but greater still in influence. Their presence reshaped the balance of power among men. Imagine a world where the strongest warrior is nothing compared to what stands before him. Imagine cities rising in the shadow of beings 3 times the height of ordinary men. Imagine leadership enforced not by wisdom, but by sheer, overwhelming force. The giants did not hide. They walked openly among early civilizations. Their size alone commanded obedience. Their strength made resistance meaningless. But physical power was only the beginning. The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers, the ones who descended, as teachers. They revealed knowledge that humanity had not yet earned. They taught the forging of weapons. They showed how to draw metal from stone and bend it to human will. They instructed in the crafting of blades, spears, armor, tools that amplified violence beyond anything previously known. They revealed the secrets of the heavens, the courses of the stars, the movement of constellations, calculations of time, knowledge that could guide but also manipulate. They taught the cutting of roots and the mixing of substances, the shaping of materials, the altering of what was natural. Knowledge itself is not evil, but power given without wisdom becomes destruction. Under their rule, humanity accelerated. Cities expanded rapidly. Massive stones were lifted into place. Structures appeared that seemed to defy the limits of human strength. Civilizations advanced, but not toward peace. Ambition grew. Strength became the highest virtue. Dominance became the goal. Mercy was seen as weakness. Fear became the language of authority. Genesis gives only a brief description. The earth was corrupt before God and filled with violence. Those words are simple, but devastating. Corrupt does not merely mean immoral. It means decayed from the inside, twisted from its intended design, distorted beyond recognition. The violence was not isolated. It was systemic. Tribes fought not for survival, but for supremacy. Bloodshed became normal. The taking of life became common. Some traditions claim the giants themselves consumed what they ruled. Whether in flesh or in resource, they devoured the world around them. The balance of creation began to fracture. Storms intensified. The land seemed restless. The harmony between humanity and the earth weakened, and the Watchers saw it.
They had crossed a line. They had altered the course of a world still in its beginning. Their offspring grew more violent, less restrained, more consumed by appetite. The age of the Nephilim reached its height, a civilization of power without conscience, knowledge without restraint, strength without mercy. Humanity had been shaped in the image of its Creator. Now it was being reshaped in the image of the giants. The boundary between heaven and earth had been broken, and once broken, consequences follow. Behind the veil of the sky, something was stirring, not in panic, not in haste, but in judgment. Because when corruption fills the earth, when violence becomes its language, when pride reaches toward heaven itself, a reckoning begins to form. The age of giants was not eternal. It was building towards something, and the earth was about to answer for what it had become.
And heaven was not silent. The ancient writings tell us that even the watchers began to sense what was coming, not from the earth, but from above. The corruption had spread too far. It was no longer confined to cities or rulers. It had entered the structure of human desire itself. Violence was no longer commanded, it was admired. Bloodshed was no longer necessary, it was celebrated. The Nephilim stood as symbols of dominance, and humanity mirrored them. Power became identity, fear became governance, strength became morality. But the rebellion that began in heaven had consequences that reached beyond earth. The Book of Enoch describes how the watchers, realizing the magnitude of their transgression, sought a mediator. They turned to Enoch, a man described as walking with God. They asked him to carry their petition upward. They asked him to speak on their behalf. They asked for mercy. But the answer was not pardon. It was decree. The watchers would be bound. Their offspring would not endure. The corruption of the earth would not continue indefinitely. And so a separation began. The rebellious were marked for judgment. The world itself stood under scrutiny. Genesis speaks again with chilling clarity. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, not merely present, great, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Every imagination, not one generation, not one city, but the condition of the age. The earth, once described as good, now groaned beneath distortion. Some traditions describe the giants devouring resources beyond renewal. Others speak of warfare that left valleys emptied and rivers red. Whether literal or poetic, the message is consistent. Creation was unraveling. Storms grew unnatural. The sky felt heavier. The wind carried tension that unsettled even the strong. The Nephilim sensed it too. Their dominance had not prepared them for what they could not fight, because judgment was not rising from beneath them, it was forming beyond their reach. The watchers who had descended would now be confined. The text describes them bound in darkness, awaiting a future reckoning. Their knowledge remained, but their freedom would not. And their offspring, the giants who once towered above humanity, would not shape the future. For corruption has a limit, violence has a threshold, and pride, when it reaches towards heaven itself, meets resistance. The decision was not impulsive. It was measured. It was deliberate. It was sorrowful. Because the same humanity shaped in divine image had chosen imitation of rebellion. But within the corruption there remained a remnant, one family, one man described as righteous in his generation. Noah. In a world governed by fear, he walked differently. In a civilization intoxicated with strength, he listened. The decree formed. The earth would be cleansed, not annihilated, cleansed. The waters that once gathered at creation would rise again, not to create this time, but to reset. The giants who believed themselves unmovable would face something they could not overpower. The cities that rose in shadow would sink into silence. The weapons forged in fire would rust beneath water, and the knowledge once misused would scatter. The age of the Nephilim had reached its fullness, and when fullness comes, so does reckoning. The sky darkened, cloud systems gathered beyond natural pattern, the air grew heavy. Some mocked the warnings, some ignored them, but the decree had already been spoken. The boundary broken in rebellion would now be answered in judgment. And as the first winds began to shift, as the horizon dimmed, as the earth trembled beneath pressure unseen, heaven moved, not in panic, not in chaos, but in judgment. And the world of giants, the age that reshaped humanity, stood on the edge of its end.